much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. I want to thank this committee for providing the opportunity for members to make their presentations on important priorities and projects, not only for our districts, but for the entire country. I think that one of the most important things that we can do in this Congress on a bipartisan effort would be a major infrastructure package. And I know the chair is very keen on this, as well as many other members. I am somewhat more hopeful, I think, today after the meeting that was reported yesterday that the chair participated in with other members of the Democratic leadership. I think the investment of $2 trillion in America's infrastructure is probably on point. It's probably actually greater than that. Testimony last month between business and labor before Ways and Means Committee estimated a similar number. We have at least $1 trillion in backlog just to rehabilitate existing infrastructure. And when we talk about the kind of investments we need to be making for the future in the 21st century, that's at least another $1 trillion. And the reality is that we're living off the investments our parents and our grandparents made a generation and two ago. And when we go to Europe and when we go to Asia and we see the wonderful infrastructure that's there, guess what? It's there because they paid for it. They made the investment. Now, while we can all agree that Republicans and Democrats alike want to invest in infrastructure, we know where the big obstacle has been recently, and that is how you fund it. This can't happen unless we can agree upon real money. I was in some of the initial conversations last year in the White House, and they had a framework, but they had no meat on the bone. And the meat on the bone is, how do you fund this? Because it doesn't become real. We have almost 30 states, including California, that have come up to the plate, so to speak. In California, we've passed a 10-year program for $50 billion in investment. And over 20 states have done similarly that are Republican-controlled legislatures. So this can be bipartisan. We haven't increased the gas tax since 1994. I don't think there's one single funding formula to deal with it. I think we have to look at a menu of funding formulas that will work, that will invest it. So where do we go? We need to do it in water. Our infrastructure is aging, not only in clean drinking water, but in water supply, in terms of climate change. Clearly, we need to understand that the food that goes on America's dinner table every night doesn't happen unless we have a reliable water supply. And with climate changing out in the West and other parts of the country, we know how critical that water resource is. But we have many communities that are suffering from not having adequate clean drinking water as well. We have boating and harbors that also need to be invested in. Let's talk about transportation. Clearly, this is the focus of this committee. And our roadways are aging, our bridges and such. This will be key. Having carried multi-billion-dollar measures in California to fund our transportation system, I can tell you that it's a mix of using all the transportation modes, because there's no single one mode that's going to deal with commerce, deal with moving people back and forth, and using 21st century technologies. As a co-chair, along with Congresswoman Lofgren and Congressmember Lou Correa, for the high-speed rail effort in California, having carried the original high-speed rail measure that had provided multi-billion-dollar funding at the state level, we need the feds to step up to the plate. We have corridors in Florida, Texas, California, and other parts of the country. And guess what? When you look at those marvelous high-speed rail systems in Europe and in Japan and in China, it wasn't rocket science in how they built them. They built them because the national governments decided that they wanted to make a commitment and they would make it happen. And they've made that long-term commitment. You know, I wonder today when we talk about high-speed rail, if President Lincoln had been posed with the same question during the Civil War, during inflation, during perhaps the most divisive time in our country's history, and they said, gee, Abe, why don't you wait till your second term? I mean, it happens when you put real money to make it happen. And so I think matching funds, I think we should reward states in all modes, whether we're talking about high-speed rail, whether we're talking about roadways, freeways, bridges. For states and local governments that have skin in the game, we ought to reward them. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I commit to helping this committee and this Congress pass this bipartisan infrastructure package, because it's not only our future, but it's jobs, and it will improve the economy, and we should not forget that. Thank you.
Well,